projecting what our version of reality is, what we think is right, what we think is normal, what we think is makes sense onto other people, onto other cultures, onto other religions, just onto the world as a whole. So thank you for sharing that. And for those of you in the YouTube world, we just watched, what was it called? Awesome Haka at a Wedding Reception. And we'll put the link to that in the description down below. And so y'all can enjoy that video. So we're going to take another deep breath. So last week, well, really the last 2 weeks, we were really going into some of Brené Brown's teachings of shame. And so that's just really leading us nicely into some of the conversations that we're going to be going into today. One thing I wanted to start out with was a couple Tara Brach quotes. And the first one is this. Imagine you are walking in the woods and you see a small dog sitting by a tree. As you approach it, it suddenly lunges at you, teeth bared. You are frightened and angry, but then you notice that one of its legs is caught in a trap. Immediately your mood shifts from anger to concern. You see that the dog's aggression is coming from a place of vulnerability and pain. This applies to all of us. When we behave in hurtful ways, it is because we are caught in some kind of trap. The more we look through the eyes of wisdom at ourselves and one another, the more we cultivate a compassionate heart. I love some of those key words there. Read that in for a moment first. You see that the dog's aggression is coming from a place of vulnerability and pain. Vulnerability has been a key word we've been using these past couple weeks, isn't it? Especially with Brené Brown. And that she teaches that it's only in a place of vulnerability, that's where your real strength comes from. Being able to remove those blockages. Being able to see yourself for truly where you're at and see other people for where they're truly at. And I believe that we've created this culture of ours that's we've created quite an isolated culture, haven't we? To where anytime we often see people in vulnerability, we sometimes judge them. Think about maybe you've done this with your kids, or this has happened to you growing up in an instance where you have expressed your authentic self to someone and they said that's not who you are. Here you're being vulnerable, and you're probably actually really joyous to express this newfound insight about who you are, who you're becoming in this world, and then some authoritative figure says, no, that's not you. Maybe you've even experienced this in a relationship before. Here you have this great insight, this great idea, and then your spouse is like, no, that's not who you are. Or maybe you've been transforming. Maybe you found the spiritual path and you've started to focus on self-development and you're growing. And then you have friends in your life that have been around maybe for 20 years, and then they start to see all this transformation taking place. And they're just like, I am so concerned for you. You are not acting like yourself. You're like, well, this is actually who I've always been. I've just been too afraid to show it. But it's challenging their belief system. Just how I wanted to challenge some of y'all's belief systems of that Polynesian war dance at the wedding, the honor dance, the haka. Isn't that beautiful? So in our culture, it is so unusual. Why would they contort their faces? Why would they be so loud and stomp? But in essence, it makes perfect sense to them. And here all their chakras are open and they're expressing this love. But in our culture, at least some of our culture, there's so many, the mixing pots of America. But in our culture, at least what you see is that you don't do these things. Maybe some of you have been raised with the idea that children are to be seen and not heard. And that echoes out into your adulthood. And that you must always keep your voice suppressed in some way, especially possibly for women, that you're not supposed to challenge your husband's authority. That really, just 50 years ago, that was a big thing. We're seeing it shift today, but still, maybe there's those concepts that there's still this inequality that's taking place. We see it manifest in a lot of ways, and that's why I love this morning. We went into the book by Merlin Stone, When God Was a Woman, really getting to look at the divine and sacred feminine before we started to see what led us into the patriarchal culture that we live in today. Granted, it is shifting, it's changing, but again, all of these concepts, all of these ideas are just to help us look outside of this box that we've created, look outside of this reality that we think is right. We look at something and we instantly put a label on it, we instantly put a story around it. Right when you see that vicious dog in that quote, you think, how terrible. I must protect myself. This is dangerous, this is bad. But then you get another piece of information and you see its leg caught in a trap, and automatically, all y'all animal lovers out there, what do you want to do? You will risk getting hurt, won't you? Mm-hmm. You will risk getting hurt trying to free this animal. You instantly become selfless. While first, you are ready to protect yourself, even take the animal's life if you have to, possibly. And then all of a sudden you see that it is in pain and in distress, and you're willing to risk your own well-being to save this life. What a divine paradox. What a divine paradox. That we could go from this to this in an instant. We see that happen in tragedies. Your neighbors that you just can't stand. But the moment they're in need of help, or when war strikes, or when a terrorist, some terrorism happens, instantly people forget about themselves and they just get into action. They go and help people. Isn't that fascinating? We see that happen again and again, either natural disasters or some type of external or internal threat. We see it happen again and again and again and again and again. And so why can't we live in that mode of thinking every day, of compassion, of wanting to help? It's because we get caught up in our mind. We start to get addicted and attached to these stories that we're playing about the people in our lives and the roles that they're playing. The frustration, the victim, the abuser, all these different modalities. Does that make sense? But if we realize that everyone who is bringing negativity into our life is just a dog trapped, its leg trapped, and that's why they're projecting this pain, then maybe we could take a step back and see the compassion. Does that make sense? And also, this can lead to our own forgiveness, because we all have our own traps. Every time we're in negative emotion or negative thought, or every time we lash out at someone or we lose our patience, that's just our own mind, our own leg being caught in a trap. We're putting more stock in the ego perspective, our egoic personality, than our higher perspective. Does that make sense? So, really good analogy, isn't it? Really good analogy. So, read that in for a moment. Here is another quote. I recently read in the book My Stroke of Insight by brain scientist Jill Bolt Taylor that the natural lifespan of an emotion, the average time it takes for it to move through the nervous system and body, is only a minute and a half. After that, we need thoughts to keep the emotion rolling. So if we wonder why we lock into painful emotional states like anxiety, depression, or rage, we need to look no further than our own endless stream of inner dialogue. I've never read that before. Abraham Hicks often talks about shift your negative thinking within 15 seconds, 16 seconds or less, otherwise it starts to build up momentum. But I guess it does mirror, because she says once it hits around a minute or so, you're just full-blown emotion, and it's hard to stop that momentum. And then here, it's talking about an emotion only goes through the body and nervous system a minute and a half. Then it's done. Then it's released. But what is our inner dialogue when we keep... Who's felt a day of just not feeling good emotionally? Who's felt a week? A month? A weird few years? Right? And so I love meeting new clients and students, because first thing I have them do, and when we sit in my office and they sit on that couch, I ask them, what is the number one or the two top broken record negative thoughts you keep thinking every single day? What are the two main ones? Let's look at that. And once they pull it out and they put it on paper in front of them, it's like, oh, I'm literally thinking about this every single day, many times a day, even hundreds of times a day. Every time I look in the mirror, every time I turn on the television, every time I eat some type of food, every time this, I get triggered again, and every time I go into work, every time I have a conversation with my partner, just boom, 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 boom. So it's no wonder that these things keep happening and we keep feeling these emotions because we keep fueling it over and over and over again. So we want to shift that dialogue just how we want to shift the perspective of the dog. Does that make sense? Isn't that delicious? Mm-hmm. So again, we've all heard this before. I've talked about this hundreds of times. But this is just another way of looking at it that can hit home, because I found myself, like I said, this last month, even though I've been doing this for a decade, last month I found myself getting trapped in that cycle once again. And just know, you're trapped in that cycle if ever you're trying to justify yourself or someone else. So if you're trying to justify your actions or someone else's actions, you're caught in that cycle. Or if you're trying to explain yourself or explain someone else, you're caught in that action. Anytime you're bumping realities with someone else and you find yourself just this constant end of saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and it doesn't matter what you say, it just keeps leading to the same result. But still, you keep analyzing it, thinking that it's going to change somehow if you just say the right thing. And the issue is, it's not about the words, it's about reality. And that's why we just go back to compassion. We go back to not needing to explain ourselves, justify ourselves. Who has, I think one of the Brene Brown videos talked about this, but whenever you say no to someone, do you ever feel like you have to give an explanation?
Oh, yes.
That's an example of it, isn't it? That is an example of needing to explain ourselves. That people can't handle the truth. They can't handle the no. But what's fascinating is that the more insecure we are about saying no to people, that we actually cultivate more conflict in our lives. But when you're confident, you just say, no, that's not for me, thank you though. And everyone just accepts it. Have you noticed that? It, depending on your confidence level, it either is an issue or it becomes an issue based on your own expectation of what you think the reaction is going to be. Delicious. One more quote. The Buddha never intended to make desire itself the problem. When he said craving causes suffering, he was referring not to our natural inclination as living beings to have wants and needs, but to our habit of clinging to experience that must, by nature, pass away. And again, that's by Tara Brach. So let me repeat that. The Buddha never intended to make desire itself the problem. When he said craving causes suffering, he was referring not to our natural inclination as living beings to have wants and needs, but to our habit of clinging to experiences that must by nature pass away. In Buddhism, a very common belief is life is suffering. You're alive, you're going to suffer. And the craving, your desire, your very idea of want and desire creates suffering. But by itself, it doesn't necessarily. It's only when you're trying to cling to something and only want it a certain way. When you're saying, I want this, but it can only look like this. I want your love, but it has to be in this form, in this way. And you put all these expectations on what life should look like. That's where we get caught up in pain. If you have an inspiration, a want, and a desire, just like, I could really go for some chicken nuggets right now. Or some vegan nuggets right now. That's not going to bring you pain. But if you want it and it's not around, what happens? If you're attached to the concept, you can actually get a little upset over it. I remember when I was in my depression years as a teenager or preteen, I would come home from school and I would need to eat half a box of cereal, especially the Honey Bunches of Oats. That was my favorite. It was like my stress unwind. And I remember a few times when we were out. We were out. And it did not go well. I threw a fit. I was so addicted to having this food as my support system that I needed that deliciousness and the coolness of the liquid and the crunch and watching my cartoons after school, that it would just make all my pain go away, because that was the time when I had school itself was so stressful with the constant bullying. And so in that instance, food became my my go-to. Does that make sense? And so it's fascinating. Here we have these cravings, and when we're not met, who has craved physical touch or affection or love from someone, a partner, a spouse, a friend, and you're not getting it the way you want. Your love language is not being met. The very concept of wanting it a certain way, that is fine. You express yourself. But then you look at it and say, can this person actually give it to me? And a lot of times we keep ourselves in situations and in realities where they can't at all. That's where the pain comes in, that's where the suffering comes in, and that's when we have to accept. And once you move into that acceptance stage, you let it go. And no longer does it become a source of pain. Does that make sense? But the longer you keep that same story going over and over again, it has to look this way, and from this person is my rendezvous point. I love this person, it can only come from this person. All you're doing is blocking off the universe from giving you other opportunities of the people that can actually give you the love that you seek. But instead you keep playing that same broken record over and over. It can only be this way and only from this person, or even it can only look this way from this job or this way. You just keep playing it over and over and over and over again, and you keep yourself trapped in suffering. That's what we're talking about. Does that make sense? I had one of my students, I loved her question. She's reading one of my favorite teachers, Pema Chodron, and she's a Buddhist nun, and she teaches hopelessness. Let go of all hope. And I remember that because back in the day when I was in my first love experience, my mom would say the most wonderful thing. He'll come around. She doesn't talk like that. But she'll say, he'll come around. He'll come back to you. Watch, he'll come back. One day I told her, that's the worst thing to tell me. Don't give me hope. I need to let go. The very concept of thinking he'll be back in my life is keeping me attached. Because in this present moment, he does not exist. He does not love me. Or maybe he loves me, but he's not choosing love. He is halfway across the world. He's a Marine. Halfway across the world and not interested in this interaction. But he'll be back. Do you see what that does to the mind? Mm-hmm. Do you see these illusions? That is 100% illusion because it's not based on the present moment. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So what stories are you telling yourself of getting addicted to hope that can easily keep you trapped in that cycle? So I eventually learned to tap into this teaching of hopelessness, that it's not a negative. It sounds so negative. Let go of hope. It's really just accept the reality in front of you and then act. What hopelessness means is accept the reality right here now and then actively choose. This is where the Abraham Hicks teachings comes in. Once you have the neutrality of accepting reality as it is, then you could choose to follow your desire and your want. But you can't have your desires and wants attached to things that aren't willing to give it to you. Does that make sense? If a job's not working out, if a relationship's not working out, and this keeps happening, you can try and make things adjust, especially if it's been a long-term relationship. When there's two people involved, I've done this many times, where I want to make it work. I want to invest. Somewhere along the road, we had some miscommunications, and they turned, it was just a little rock, now it's a huge boulder. If two people are invested in wanting to make something work, it is so possible, but both people have to be invested. Mm-hmm. If you just keep projecting on one person, and they literally tell you, I'm not interested, but you just think, they'll come around. That is so not helping. It's not beneficial. And the same, I love Oprah says, when people tell you who they are, believe them. When people tell you who they are, believe them. When people tell you who they are, believe them. I remember back when I was in my dating phase, where I would date gentlemen. It's kind of like, how we sometimes get addicted, the stereotype of the woman dating the bad boy, thinking that they can fix them. Mm-hmm. They're edgy, and I will be the one that they fall in love with. I will change them. I did that. And I would date these men that were emotionally unavailable, and I thought, well, just because it's me, I can change them. Who has been there before? And it's the very concept of unrequited love. And love really is a choice in the mind. We get attached to someone, we choose to love them. And love is actually here. I'm gonna just give you one thought, and then we'll conclude on this today. This is a powerful thought. Bear with me. We often think that we don't have a choice of the people we fall in love with, but I believe that we do, because it's simply based on the thoughts that we think about the person. and we start to keep playing those things over and over and over in our head. And what's fascinating is that we fall in love with the way that person made us feel at one point because we felt connected. We felt connected to Source. And so we get attached to this emotion. And then we attach that emotion to their face. And we start to, and then what's funny is that once we imprint onto them, they could be as abusive as hell, but we still think that, we still go back to that moment of connection, of how they made us feel. That made our loneliness go away, or made us feel seen and heard, even though if they're creating all the negatives in our life in that instance. Isn't that fascinating? That is how powerful Source is. That we felt connection to Source once with this person, and then we imprinted our love onto them. And no matter how bad it could get, we still always go back to that one point in time of Source connection. That is God. That is how powerful the soul is. And it takes a lot of work to realize, I chose this. And what's fascinating and where I'm at today in practicing the Living Peace teachings and Dunasha is that I now know I can fall in love with pretty much anyone. I can have that romantic love and choose to have that on anyone that I desire. But now I look at, where is the worthiness of that coming from? There needs to be vibrational match. Does that make sense? I had a friend once tell me, it's not about who you want to fall in love with, it's who deserves your love. Ooh. It's not about who you want to be in love with and have a relationship with, it's who deserves it from you. Who is showing up and matching that within you. That's the people, those are the friendships, the romantic relationships, the community, the support system, the family members that you want to invest your time in. Isn't that delicious? So breathe into that. And we release. Thank you.